Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Emma Haberman. I'm the Director of Special Projects at World Central Kitchen on our communications team. Community is core to World Central Kitchen's work wherever we are, whether we're on the ground in a relief response or whether you're fueling our efforts behind the scenes. And I'm so glad to have the chance to share this afternoon with you all to celebrate the close of a very big year at WCK and to share a little bit more about our cookbook and to dive behind the scenes into how the cookbook, Feeding Humanity, Feeding Hope, came to be. The book itself is a testament to community with many contributors sharing their stories through food. And today we'll learn a bit more about how they came to be and play a little trivia along the way. So hopefully you'll leave here with a better understanding of how we decided to tell our story this way. Our invitation today included a recipe for coquito, which is a Puerto Rican drink traditionally enjoyed this time of year. The recipe can be found on page 278 of the cookbook. If you're enjoying a cup with us now, salud. And if you're not, I hope you'll make it this season and salud anyway. We can't do this without you and your support. And so thank you for always showing up for us and allowing us to show up for people around the world in their heaviest times. Now, it is a true pleasure to introduce our panelists for today. Sam Chappell-Sokol is the editorial director of José Andrés Media. Hello, Sam. Sam is
Hi, Emma.
Sam is the editorial director of special projects at José Andrés Group and José Andrés Media, focusing on José's Substack newsletter, books, and other written projects. He has worked in the extended José Andrés world for 7 years, both with the restaurant group and here at WCK. Before joining this world, Sam worked as a sommelier, a cheesemonger, a charcutier, and a pastry chef at the White House during the Obama years. Sam has a master's in international relations from the Fletcher School at Tufts University, where his research focused on the intersection of food and diplomacy. And Sam is co-author of the World Central Kitchen Cookbook, along with Jose. Next, joining us is Sammy Higgins, who is World Central Kitchen's Director of Content. Hi, Sammy.
Hello.
Sammy leads storytelling as WCK's Director of Content, connecting audiences around the world with our team in the field, our efforts getting meals to people following crises in the communities we meet along the way. If you follow us on social or receive our emails or have ever looked at our website, you are very familiar with her work. She is passionate about amplifying the voices of the people who make WCK's work around the world possible, sharing stories of food, culture, and community as they support neighbors through some of their darkest times. She studied public affairs at the University of San Francisco and believes that all things in life tie back to food. Just ask her cats, gnocchi and cannoli. Sam's cat, for the record, is named Basil. And Sammy provided a lot of the creative direction behind the cookbook. So you guys have some stories to tell. First of all, cheers. Hello. Happy holidays.
Cheers.
Thank you so much for
Happy
being
holidays.
here. Before we begin, we'd love to do a quick pulse check of our audience and our guests here. We're going to do a quick little poll. Please answer whether or not you already have the World Central Kitchen Cookbook. You don't need to explain yourself. It's a great holiday gift if you haven't gotten yours yet. Okay, so Sammy and Sam, maybe Sam, let's start with you. Can you speak about, wow, about half and half. Great news. For those who don't have it yet, it's available at your local bookstore and all major retailers. Sam, can you talk a bit about how the cookbook came to be and what prompted this project?
Yeah, so the origin of the project was well before my time working with Jose. Jose founded this organization in 2010 after the super devastating earthquake in Haiti. He was a pretty big name chef at the time, went to Haiti to understand the damage and to kind of learn about how chefs can use their skills after disasters, and realized that there was nobody in disaster areas, or often there's nobody in disaster areas who focus on feeding and food and making sure that people have something good to eat after a disaster. So as a chef and somebody of the stature and the kind of the mindset of Jose, he kind of always had in the back of his head that there ultimately would be a cookbook from the recipes of World Central Kitchen. World Central Kitchen prides itself on making really homegrown dishes, dishes inspired by local communities, from local chefs. So we have a collection of hundreds, if not thousands, of dishes and recipes we've cooked since 2010. So I was brought on in about 2019 to start this project. So this just came out in September. So it really was about 4 years from when we put brains to paper to when we actually published this thing. But it was conceived a lot longer before than that.
Are there any, I mean, you mentioned that there are just so many recipes from our work around the world and from, from a decade plus of doing this, and there are not hundreds of recipes in the book. Can you talk a little bit about sort of that process and how, I guess not, not necessarily what recipes made it or didn't make it, but sort of, what are some highlights, I guess, in the book's development for you?
Yeah, I mean, with that many recipes to choose from, it was really an interesting process to figure out what would be in and what wouldn't make it in. We've been, Sammy, you might have the number off the top of your head, but World Central Kitchen has worked in 30 something countries around the world,
40, I think we're over 40 now.
over 40 countries. And each country obviously has its own dishes, its own ingredients, its own culture and history, but more specifically than that, every community has all of those same things as well. So with every place we go, whether it's responding to tornadoes in Tennessee or cyclones in Mozambique, we're going to see an incredible variety of dishes, of stories that that feed into, literally and figuratively, the food that we make as an organization. So it was almost, it was conversations and interviews with chefs, local community leaders, volunteers that we've worked with in almost every single activation we've ever had, to start to compile the long list of recipes that we wanted to think about including in this book. And then as a team here and with Jose, we whittled that list down to make sure that it was regionally diverse, practically diverse, different, proteins, different vegetarian dishes, a few desserts, obviously a few cocktails. So we wanted to make as broad, have as broad a footprint as we could in obviously a limited amount of space. We ended up with about 72 recipes in the book.
Sammy, I'm curious from your perspective, you as the director of content, you live your life in the stories from the field in the day to day. And a lot of that is, obviously through the food that we're serving in any given moment. Have you, can you talk a little bit about how that came to play when you were talking through or thinking through what recipes should make it? And then the flip of that is that, have you seen any recipes from the book, sort of continue on in the field since the book was submitted?
Sure. So I think and I think the entire WCK team who works in the field, whether it be relief or on the storytelling side, feels such a great honor in hearing the stories that we hear from the people who serve with us and the people we serve. It really is just every day so inspiring and in such difficult circumstances. And food is such a universal, like every culture has food at its core. And so I think the cookbook was just such a great opportunity to connect people who care about this work, who support this work, and who really make it possible from all over the world, to connect them in a new way with the work. And that just was such a special thing, connecting people with our work through food, which is really just the perfect kind of marriage of it all. And as far as recipes, I will say WCK is constantly on the move. And so it was really hard. We kept pushing what we could add into the manuscript before it was turned in, because we wanted it to be as up to date as possible and we just, you know, you hear all these incredible stories and eat all this incredible food around the world and want. So it was hard to kind of, when we had to stop and that was it, it was going to print. I think if I had to pick one dish that is, as the book calls it, universally comforting and that we see over and over again, it is a version of the turkey bolognese. We really make that all over the world, and it's so adaptable depending upon what produce is available, even what protein is available. There's, you know, it just is, it works in a lot of situations, and it's always warm, it's always comforting. And I have, you know, it's in the cookbook, and I've continued to see it since we completed the book.
Yeah. This week, our team is currently on the ground in Tennessee responding to tornadoes, as you mentioned, Sam, and Chef Molly Kaufman, who's one of our staff chefs who has recipes in the book, her chicken pot pie, it had, you know, became very famous in our response to COVID here at Nats Park in DC, and she made it in Tennessee this week. And so it's kind of, you know, a cool cycle to see how it continues, and then also how people can really bring that into their homes. One more question about sort of how we got here before we move on, which is kind of bringing us to now. Can you just tell us a little bit, Sam, I think I'll throw this to you, about coquito and cremas, which is the version that you're drinking, but can you just tell us a little bit about, especially for those who might be enjoying it at home, what this is, this delicious creamy treat?
Totally. So I was lucky enough to go to Puerto Rico for a research trip in the winter of 2021. And I hadn't ever had coquito before. It's not something you necessarily find in restaurants. It's really more of a home drink. It's something that you would go to a party and you would bring your bottle of coquito that you've made at home, and you kind of exchange it, or like that your hosts will have a bottle of coquito to give you. So one of my colleagues, Richard, and I were going from farm to farm and some of the partners that we have in Puerto Rico, and we'd get a couple bottles of coquito, and we'd go to the next place and hand those off as a gift to the next host, and they'd give us a couple more bottles, and then we go to the next place, and it kind of some sort of coquito Ponzi scheme going on. But it's a really traditional Christmas drink. It's, you know, one of my colleagues at José Andrés group right now is actually having coquito at the office, and I'm missing it right this minute. So this is the kind of thing that's very common and very popular at this time. I'm drinking a different version called cremas, which is on in that same part of the recipe, and it's very similar. It's from Haiti. It's made with a dark rum instead of a light rum, and it's a bit more spiced and has actually some lime zest that you infuse into the drink. So it's a bit darker and deeper in character. The bottle that I'm drinking I made it 2 years ago, and I'm still feeling fine. So in the book, we wrote that you can drink it after a year if it still survives, but I think you can drink it after 2 years if you still have some. But if in the middle of this,
use your best judgment.
Yeah, use your best judgment. If it doesn't smell right, I don't know if you saw me sniffing it, using my best sommelier nose to figure out if it smells off. But
and your cheesemonger nose too.
My cheesemonger nose, yeah, it does not smell like cheese, which is good.
Amazing. Okay. Before we move on to talk about other things, would love to sort of test our audience's knowledge. What ingredient of the following is in coquito? The options are going to be star anise, cayenne pepper, or coffee. And while the audience answers, let's move it on a little bit to talk about sort of the organization of the book and the chapters. The book is not organized like a traditional cookbook. First of all, I have never read, and maybe this is just me, but I've never read a cookbook cover to cover. And as powerful in this book, star anise, correct. Great work, everyone. I do think coffee.
So there are versions of, yeah, exactly. There are versions of coquito. We had one that had coffee in it, and it was amazing. It was from Alexander Maldonado, who's one of our partners who Sammy and the team knows. And it's a great coquito. So you could use coffee. Maybe you could even use cayenne if you want.
Why not? So, I mean, the book it has recipes, yes, but also it's just so much about the stories, as you were saying, Sammy, and just it's a narrative as well, and it reads so beautifully. And along those lines, it's not organized like a traditional cookbook. It's not organized by course, or you know, protein, veg, etc. So, Sammy, could you start, I guess, and talk a little bit about how it's organized and why? And I'd be curious to hear sort of how you arrived, from either of you, how you arrived at this organization.
I will let Sam after talk about how we arrived here, because it was a real breakthrough that I would love to give him the floor for. I guess going down to once we figured out how to do it and why, so much of it is what we want people to take away from this book. And, you know, it's organized as chapters that are empathy, urgency, adaptation, hope, all these ways, all these kind of core values that drive how WCK operates. And, you know, the recipes fit into these things. Urgency is food that you can take on the go, as we're often serving people on the move in, you know, in various situations. And so I think what we really wanted people to get out of it is these core values of WCK, and not to understand WCK more, yes, but also that these values can be applied to everyday life beyond World Central Kitchen. And you know, that when you make the recipes in this book, you're thinking about these values and how, you know, how do you show up with hope in the world, and how can you bring community together? And we really hope that beyond the work of World Central Kitchen, these values just extend through our community beyond. And Sam, I don't know if you want to add a little bit more or talk about how we got here.
Yeah, we got here. It was a really interesting process. None of the people on our team had ever written a cookbook. I helped Jose with the Vegetables Unleashed cookbook. We published in 2019, I think. But it's a very untraditional cookbook, but it's more traditional than this one in many ways. So Sammy and I started working on a book proposal, which is in order to sell a book to a publisher, to have a publisher agree to publish your book, you have to write a proposal. And during the dark year of 2020, Sammy and I gave ourselves a little bit of light by giving this thing some life. And our proposal initially had it broken down by country or region that we'd responded. So it was like there was a Florida chapter, Florida and the Carolinas, because we responded to a lot of hurricanes there, and California, where we responded to wildfires and earthquakes, and Indonesia and Bahamas and Puerto Rico and Haiti, and each of these were separate chapters. And we had some great conversations with a few potential publishers. This is behind the scenes, but we actually got rejected by 2 publishers, which is interesting considering that it's now a New York Times bestseller. I'm sure they are kicking themselves. No hard feelings though.
Yeah,
but ultimately,
thank you for your support if you're here.
But we love Clarkson Potter. We love Raquel Pelzel, who was our editor, and she ultimately talked us through the fact that originally Sammy and I were thinking of this book almost as an autobiography of World Central Kitchen, punctuated with recipes. And Raquel said that doesn't exist, and there's no reason to make that exist. You can tell your stories, but have it be a more traditional feeling and looking cookbook. And that cookbook, as we started to think about it, can be more of a Trojan horse to tell the stories that we wanted to be telling. Mm-hmm. And she also gave us really good advice, which is like, nobody's going to open a cookbook and say like, ooh, I really want to go to the volcano chapter, or like, ooh, I wonder what earthquakes taste like. So that stopped us in our tracks, and we're like, okay, we need to reinvent this thing entirely. But we didn't want to do chicken and beef and vegetables and desserts, because that's not how we think of things. That's not how World Central Kitchen really functions on the ground. So I kind of just started playing with these values and using them as building blocks. And I literally, my wall behind my desk had Post-it notes of the different values and Post-it notes of every single recipe we were thinking about including. And we were just kind of like shuffling them around and figuring out, you know, is the is the passion fruit glazed skirt steak, is that a community dish or a resilience dish? You know, is this stew gonna, like, which one is going to be, is that empathy or hope? And really trying to dig down. And there's a reason, I think, that each dish is in each chapter. Some of them are more tenuous than others because they had to fit them in. But for the most part, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I hope it communicates, or I hope it like reads for people who are engaging with the book. I hope it made sense.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting to hear, you know, how an editor's feedback comes into even the pitch process and like certainly the final product. I'm interested in, because you, Sam, and Jose, and World Central Kitchen as an organization are the authors named on this book. And obviously all of us did not write the book, but the contributors are many, and some are chefs who work with WCK full time. Some are local cooks that we've met in the field in all kinds of countries and places. Some are very famous friends of World Central Kitchen chefs and home cooks alike, and we can talk about that in just a minute. But was that a discussion point with the publisher as well, of, you know, of having so many contributors and so many, you know, that's such a core part of how we work, right? We said this in the beginning, that community is essential. It's a chapter in the book, but it's also essential to how we function because our staff is still relatively small compared to the magnitude of what we respond to. But, you know, I mean, Ina Garten writes a cookbook and she writes the cookbook, you know, so I'm curious if that was ever a discussion with either the editors or the publishers, how to sort of craft that.
Yeah, I think that they didn't want this to feel like a compilation. They wanted to feel authored, because to have an organization, you know, it's funny to have an organization write a cookbook. Obviously, it has Jose's name on it, but if you read the World Food Program cookbook, or
Right.
name an organization that may have put out a cookbook, it feels a little institutional. And if it's just, you know, those are huge projects to undertake, and I don't want to belittle that, but if it's just a compilation of greatest hits from other people who are submitting their recipes to the book, and it's just kind of an edited volume, that's a very different product than the one we wanted to make. So the editor cautioned us to keep that number in the kind of 15 to 20% of the book, or so. And the rest of it would be from Jose, from World Central Kitchen chefs, from the ground, if you will. And we tried to maintain that. I think the three where we were most surprised, you know, it's like everybody we asked ended up saying yes. And the fact that Mrs. Obama and Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, both agreed was like, oh, I guess we can make room for two more amazing voices in the book. So those were really exciting moments when they agreed to do it. But maybe we pushed too high. I don't know. I think it's a nice balance.
Yeah.
Sammy, what do you think?
I think it's great.
I think it's great. It's great. Great.
Can you mentioned a couple of the guest contributors. Can you just give us you mentioned First Lady Obama and Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. Are there, can you share a couple of their highlights, maybe like a chef and a non-chef that you were particularly excited to have on board for this project?
Sammy?
Ooh, that's a hard question. Honestly, really, really excited for all of our contributors. I think, you know, the contributors have touched WCK in various ways over the years. Some have given amplification and support to our work, and then many have directly cooked with us on the ground. I think one of my favorite recipes, and it really is so close to home, is Chef Brian Yazzi's recipe. He did a braised bison. Chef Brian Yazzie is a Dene chef who cooked with WCK starting during the pandemic, and cooked cooked food for Indigenous elders in the in his community, and cooked with us for, gosh, I think it was like 9 or 10 months, so
A
close to
long
a
time.
year,
Yeah.
a long time, and is so passionate about the ingredients that he uses, and so passionate about supporting the community, and also so passionate about supporting WCK and ensuring that that our work happens. It's these people who are cooking every day that really make the work happen. So I was very excited for his recipe.
He's also, sorry to interrupt you, but he's also now a member of WCK Chef Corps, which is a volunteer group of chefs. Several of the other contributors are as well, but a volunteer group of chefs who contribute to our work in a lot of ways. But they're pretty important to our work as well.
Yeah, definitely. And many of the contributors are part of our Chef Corps. But Sam, maybe you want to highlight one contributor or recipe.
Yeah, one of my favorites, both for story and for the dish itself, is Aileen Kamekian. She's in Beirut. She's Armenian in origin, so her dish is lahmacun, which is a flatbread either with meat or with tomatoes. The dish itself is incredible. Aileen's story is even more incredible. She owns 2 restaurants, I believe, in Beirut, and one of them was about 200 meters from the blast that devastated the port in Beirut in 2021, I want to say.
I think 20.
And she was in the restaurant with a lot of her team having a meeting, and she herself was very badly injured, breaking ribs. She lost hearing in one ear, and she ended up like saving dozens, 25 plus members of her staff, and carrying a few of them physically downstairs. She almost doesn't remember it because she was in such shock. That she carried people downstairs to get into taxis to get to the hospital. And her story is just super powerful. And to be able to share her story in a different way, in a broader way with people through this book. I got to talk to her a lot. I've gotten to meet with her a few times, not in Beirut, but in DC, and she's just such a powerful person. So when I see her dish, when I taste her dish, it kind of, I can see and taste that power. I will say the dish that I think that I've made the most is, and one that if you haven't made it, if you have the book or if you don't have the book and you want to get the book, is actually the Duchess's lemon olive oil cake. It is so good. She used to run a food blog called The Tig, and so she knows about food. She knows about food writing. She originally made this cake and physically mailed her own cake to a group of women in Chicago for International Women's Day in 2021, during the pandemic, and a couple of restaurateurs and a couple of community members. And from like the next day, I was like, we're getting that recipe. We are putting that recipe in the cookbook. And I think it took another 8 months to finally track it down and convince her and her people to share it. And they were so lovely about it. And the dish itself, the cake, is really great. So, it's the holidays. Make yourself some cake.
The lemon cake, we're just going to continue to share trivia sort of throughout on your screen while we continue our conversation because time's flying. So if you're in the audience, please keep your eyes open. It's one of my favorite photos is the one of the lemon olive oil cake. And, we've said already that photo and video is just core to how we tell our story in the day-to-day. And the photos in this book are just so beautiful, both the ones from of the recipes and of the work. Sammy, can you talk about, how you chose the photos from WCK's history to be included? And I think that we can share some on the screen. You don't have to necessarily follow along. Yes, let's start there, and then let's talk a little bit about the cookbook photos. I mean, the recipe photos.
Yes. So storytelling is it's core to how WCK operates, and it's core to how Jose sees the world. And the power of storytelling is in large part visual. So we when it came to, I guess, backing up, when WCK works around the world, photography is a big piece of that work. If you're on this webinar, I'm sure you've seen WCK photography in email or on social or in some form. And it's just such a powerful way to show people what's happening, to connect people who are on the ground and in these situations and cooking every day, or rebuilding their lives in such a powerful way, and connecting people from around the world who care with that work can be done through photo. So we do work really hard to capture that. I think when it came to selecting photos for the book, it was really hard. I love so much of our photography, and you can see the emotion in people's eyes and the stories that come through. So when it came to selecting, I've been in this role for 5 years, and I know these photos like the back of my hand. So some are favorites that I think tell such a powerful story that I knew I wanted in the book. And then obviously we wanted some to really, the same thing with recipe selection, to show a variety of our work, to span the years, to span locations, to show chefs and people doing the work, and then also to show communities and people who are receiving and eating WCK meals. And at the end of the day, it was really hard. I wanted more photos than we have space for, because, like I said, I just love these photos so much. They're just so beautiful.
And that kind of gets into what I said before about wanting this to be an autobiography of the organization. Is like, if we'd written that, it would have had more photos and had more space, and it would have been maybe a coffee table. I don't know what the format would have been, but Sammy did a really awesome job of bringing to light the very greatest photos from WCK's history and all of the photographers we worked with. I mean, Sammy, you're incredibly effective at managing a huge number of photographers around the world. And if you look at the back of the book, each one of them are thanked, because there's a group of photographers we've worked with everywhere we go. We connect with either local photographers, or we bring in photographers to start working with local photographers about the way we storytell. And you did a really good job of not just spreading the love all around the world, but spreading the love to all the photographers we work with regularly.
Yeah, definitely want to show the work, and our photographers are they're so thoughtful about the way they approach such obviously sensitive situations. And they really build relationships with people in the field and build trust, and then are entrusted with these stories. So yeah, it was an incredible process, and it's beautiful.
And in terms of the dish photos themselves, we worked with one photographer named Kristen Teig. She's LA and Boston based, I think, bi-coastal. She was an amazing photographer. She's done a lot of cookbooks, and I think we, as a organization, as Sammy and I were like, let's just work with one of our incredible photographers to shoot this thing. And our editor smartly again said, hey, this is a cookbook. Let's photograph it like a cookbook. You can incorporate as many of the food and on the ground shots as you can throughout the rest of it. But for the actual beautiful dish shots, let's work with a cookbook pro, who did an amazing job. I love how she interpreted each of these dishes. Should we
I would love
talk
to
about this photo shoot?
Yeah, let's share some photos. And I do want to be mindful of time. We'll be here for about 15 more minutes, and we've got some great audience questions as well. Yes, would love to share some of the behind the scenes photos and talk through that a little bit. Did you say Kristen's name, Sam? Did I miss that?
Yeah, Kristen Teig is her name, Teig.
Yeah. So I, as a person who adores cookbooks and cooking shows and such, I love the sort of kitchen magic of it all. And I was not on site for the cookbook shoot, but seeing it side by side is so cool. What's happening here?
Great question. This is our firefighter chili recipe. So you can see on the right the photo that made it. On the left, that's Sam and I. And I guess a real behind the scenes story of our cookbook shoot is there's a lot of people that go into making this happen. There's somebody who specializes in just props and prop styling. There's the photographer. There's
Pause for a second. That's my child. His hands are in the book, and that will forever live with me. Anyway, keep going.
that's one of our favorite relief team members. But there's a prop stylist, there's, the photo assistant, and then obviously you have to make all of these recipes. I mean, we made 70 something recipes over 8 days. Is that what it was?
Yeah, it was like 9 dishes a day, pretty much.
Yeah, and some of them are complex. So that's Gnocchi, the cat. I don't have children, but I guess I do because I have a cat. But so you have people who help you make the food and style it, food stylists and all this. And on the first day of our 8-day in a row photo shoot, our head food stylist got COVID, which is a reality that we still live in. And Sam, I think you should tell the story of how Judy.
So if you see the woman on the far left of these photos, her name is Judy Orlick. She was the assistant food stylist. So the way it all panned out was that Victoria Granoff was the food stylist. She had an assistant, and they would be the ones cooking every single dish. This is not how we did it for the vegetables cookbook, so this was all new to me. They were the ones who were supposed to be cooking every dish. Sammy was kind of like visual, making sure everything made sense, and I was on set mostly to oversee, make sure it all made sense for our friends in the field. I was sending photos to Haiti and to Indonesia and making sure that things looked right. But after Victoria got COVID on day 1, we had this team meeting on day 2. The first thing we were like, what are we going to do? Do we cancel the shoot? Do we make this up? Like, everybody's schedules were incredibly busy. And then we looked at Judy and we were like, or can you do it? Can you style this book? And she's like, guys, I think I can do it. But do you know what it means? Is that, Sam, you're cooking the damn thing. So it was me and another chef on our team who were in the kitchen making 9 dishes a day, every single day for 8 days. And Judy was the one styling. Sammy still had her eyes on the visuals. And it was so fun and it was so intense. And I think about food all the time. I love food. Food is my world. But the next day after the shoot was over, I didn't want to think about food. It was the first day in my life that I wasn't like, what's for breakfast? I was like, let's never do food again, please. Because I was just so tired. But the results were amazing. And I think our stand-in stylist did an incredible job. It's funny because there are 8 pictures in the book from the first stylist. And it's a bit of a messier style. That's what she's known for. So if you're looking through, it's most of it is in the first chapter, actually. Not the first chapter, in Urgency, right?
Urgency.
So if you look at the Urgency chapter, you can see most of her style, and then the rest of the book is Judy's style. So it's kind of an interesting Easter egg to know that one chapter was styled differently than the rest of the book.
That's cool. That's really fun fact.
We adapted in WCK fashion.
We've got it. Yeah, it's a whole chapter. There's a whole chapter about it. There's a couple questions from the audience, and so I have to ask, and I'll ask this in a couple of ways. One is a quick yes, no. Have either of you personally made the firefighter chili for 100 people in your home? No.
I made it for the cookbook shoot. I had to make it in my home. So yes.
Does it freeze beautifully?
It freezes beautifully.
And then what can you each say?
The original, Emma, on a note on that, the original conception of this entire book, I thought that we would be doing each dish for 4 and for 40, until I realized that the testing of the 40-person dishes alone would cost the entire budget of the book. So we toned it back and had every dish for 4, and then just that one blown up to 100 to kind of teach, including the section about scaling up, to teach about how to think through scaling up a recipe. Not that we're going to give you every recipe for 100, but give you the tools to make any recipe for 100.
Yes, when I told my husband that concept, he was like, don't you just multiply the recipe for 4 by 10 for 40? And the answer is no, you do not.
I've got
So,
a great chapter, a great few pages for your husband to
yeah,
read.
35 and 36 has a great spread on how to scale. What can you each very quickly say a favorite recipe in the book? And are there recipes that you that just didn't make it that you wish we could have included?
Favorite is really hard. Really, really hard.
Favorite chapter, perhaps. Maybe that would be easier.
That's easier for me.
What?
My favorite chapter is joy. Because it is just one, I have a huge sweet tooth, and enjoy a cocktail. So the contents of the chapter are great. Also, the the best days in WCK work is when we can do something like celebrate a birthday or a holiday, and do something special for especially for children who are living through really, really challenging circumstances. And I also find that joy was such a hard chapter it was like, you don't think of joy and disaster as two things that go together. And so when you do see those moments of joy in the field in tough times, it's truly the most beautiful thing. Sorry, that wasn't as fast as I was supposed to be, but
No, beautiful.
I'm a wordy gal. Sam.
I'll make mine faster. My favorite dish, I'm just gonna say it, is beef rendang. It's so good, from Indonesia. A dish that we played with quite a bit actually, and I didn't make it, is from Albania. We responded to some earthquakes in Albania a couple of years ago, and there was a dish called fergazi that is like feta baked in kind of a red pepper tomato puree, but there was some weird textural stuff going on, and I was never in Albania, so I didn't actually taste the real dish, and I wasn't with a chef who was there, and I didn't know any Albanian chefs in DC to teach me the dish, so it just never quite came together. So that's one that I kind of want another stab at, but you know, the second cookbook.
Yeah.
I would say I'll be quicker this time. Like I said earlier, it was hard for us to cut it off because we kept getting such good stuff. And so thankfully we did do a little pre-order incentive and got to add some recipes that were more recent, including Turkish manti, which is delicious. And one of the photos shared is us actually photographing that that dish, and that we served when we in Turkey, which was only this year. So the manuscript was due and it couldn't make it in time, but we're finding other ways to share recipes.
And hopefully we'll be able to share some of those with you all here today, because there are some really lovely ones in our bonus package. Another audience question: are there cooking techniques that WCK avoids in the field? We talked about this a little bit, but Sam, you had a thought, I think, of what.
We tend not to fry too much. I think it's a health thing, but it's also a logistics thing. Fried food is best eaten immediately. And all of our food has to be made to be distributed. And while we can keep food hot, we can't necessarily keep hot food crispy. And the draw of delicious fried food is that it stays crunchy and golden and delicious. So kind of stay away from. Not to say we haven't done it, but yeah, I think that's one that's like a bit less used in the field.
And I think something that is an interesting approach. There was also an audience question about sort of how we choose restaurants that we work with and how we, make those decisions on the fly. And there are a lot of things that we take into consideration, but one of them is being culturally appropriate and thoughtful and making sure that we are, meeting people with food that they want and that is, relevant to their regular diets, but also that brings comfort and joy. And so there is a little bit of a difference between when we're working with restaurants, which is very often our approach immediately, and when we're opening our own kitchen. And in our own field kitchen, we're typically cooking tens of thousands of meals at a time, which isn't always the case with restaurants. So some of the recipes in the book, for example, like I'm thinking of the buñuelos, which is one of our desserts, which was from Sophia de Leon, who was a Chef Corps member and a restaurant partner during the pandemic. I think to close us out, I would love, it's sort of a two-parter. One is there are some folks wanting to know if there will be a second cookbook, which
I did kind of say that, but I don't know if there's plans in place. I think this book just came out a couple months ago. And we did
you don't want to think about food anymore.
Yeah, I don't want to think about food for a while. We put 4 years into this one. So if there is a second cookbook, I wouldn't start I wouldn't put your pre-orders in yet until about 2027.
We could probably do it 25% faster.
I think we could. Now that we know what we're doing.
Yeah. Adapt. And then, the name of the book, the title of the book, excuse me, the World Central Kitchen Cookbook, Feeding Humanity, Feeding Hope. We've talked a lot about how the book came to be, the stories that made it even feel like something that needed to exist. And can each of you share a story of hope from the book's development, whether someone you met along the way or something in the process? I think that'd be a lovely way to close out.
I will say that not the working title. This was never the title of the book, but one of our colleagues did suggest the title, Recipes for Disaster, which would have been a different book entirely. We didn't really have a title. It was going to be, I forget, the World Central Kitchen Cookbook, I think. And then we were actually at the photo shoot and Jose called us to chat. And he was like, guys, it's Feeding Hope, Feeding Humanity. This is the name of the book. And we were like, oh, okay, cool. I love it. And I think typographically, we ended up switching it from Feeding Humanity to Feeding Humanity, Feeding Hope.
It looks better.
It looks better. He was happy with it. I mean, I guess I'll end on a Jose story. It's not my story, but a dish in the community chapter called sauce pois noir is a Haitian dish. It's black bean sauce. It's the language is Creole, sauce pois noir. Jose first encountered this dish in his early days, 2010, in Haiti, and he was cooking with a group of women after the earthquake, and he was cooking. He was kind of a big name chef at the time, and came down to Haiti and wanted to prepare food his way. And he made a black bean and rice dish. And as soon as he was finished, the woman kind of like looked at him funny, and they're like, "Well, this is not exactly what we do here. This is not what we eat." And he was like, "Wait, what? I'm the chef. I know what I'm doing." And they pulled him aside and they were like, "No, you don't know what you're doing because you're in Haiti, and that's not what we do here." So he realized that the dish that they wanted was one that's sieved, that's like super smooth and sieved so it doesn't have the skins on it anymore. And that's the dish sauce pois noir. And I've heard Jose tell this story for my entire time working for him, and even before. It's kind of one of the foundational stories of World Central Kitchen, because it taught him about listening, and it taught him about being part of community and not coming in and telling somebody what they want, but actually listening to what they want and helping them make that. So I always knew this story, but I actually never asked the second question, was what is that dish? And it turns out it's sauce pois noir. I did a bunch of research, talked to Chef Misol Chevalier, who runs a cooking school in Port-au-Prince, and she talked me through it. We made it together. It's an incredible dish that we have the recipe. You can make it yourself. It's really tasty, and to know that is the origin of World Central Kitchen was almost like almost a spiritual moment the first time I tasted it, made by Chef Misol, because it connected the very origins of this organization with the project we were working on currently. So
I do love that. Sammy, how about you? Anything to add?
Sure. I would say WCK was founded in 2010, but really changed in September of 2017 when Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico. And this, just incredible group of chefs formed, Chefs for Puerto Rico, and Jose was there, and that's really what started WCK as the disaster relief organization it is today. And Sam and I were really struggling trying to figure out how to start this book, the introduction, and how to make it not kind of just like a timeline, but how we're going to start this. And in September of 2022, which is almost 5 years exactly to the day of Hurricane Maria hitting, Hurricane Fiona hit Puerto Rico again. And I was there with the team and seeing so many of the same exact chefs from 5 years prior who within hours, I mean, a few hours, were already there, were already cooking. No full-time WCK staff member had to get on the ground. They already knew what to do. They didn't need to be asked. And being there with them, it was just like this incredible display of like what 5 years of World Central Kitchen has done, and how when you do just support people who are supporting their own communities, the most incredible things happen. And so sitting there, I remember calling Sam and us deciding that this was how to start the cookbook, was that like 5-year look with the same people at the same food truck park cooking for neighbors. And that was
with a 4-year project like this, it's crazy to have to start it. Like, we were 99% of the way through the book and we had no idea what to put on for the first words. And like Sammy like broke through and was like, that's it. That's the way we launched this book. And it also ends, if you've read this back to back or front to end, it's a bit circular because the last story of the book is the first day in 2017 when Jose arrives and has his first rum sour. So there was intention there.
It's a beautiful book. And we're so grateful to you both for making it real and for sharing the stories the way that you do. And we're so grateful. First of all, thank you, Sammy and Sam, for joining us today. And thank you all in the audience for being here, for your very thoughtful questions, for your very kind words about the book. One of our guests has already made 16 recipes, which is
amazing.
And most of all, thank you for your support. We really truly couldn't do what we do. We couldn't meet the people we meet or tell these stories without you and your continued support. So thank you. And have a wonderful, joyful, peaceful holiday season, everyone. Thank you
all.
Bye.
Thank you.